There comes a point in many Gen X fathers' lives when they realize something unsettling. They spent decades becoming the person everyone could depend on, and now they have no idea who they are without that role. Their children depend on them, their partner depends on them, their aging parents depend on them, their job depends on them, and somewhere in the middle of carrying everyone else, they stopped noticing that nobody was carrying them. The strange part is that most Gen X fathers don't complain about this. In fact, many of them are proud of it. Being dependable became part of who they are. The one who fixes things, the one who handles problems, the one who figures it out, the one who keeps going. But psychology suggests something surprising. The strongest men are not always carrying the heaviest burdens. Sometimes they're simply carrying them alone. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why so many Gen X fathers ended up in that position, why it feels so normal to them, and why the very thing that made them dependable may also be the thing quietly exhausting them. Because this story isn't really about fatherhood, and it isn't really about exhaustion. It's about identity. Many Gen X fathers grew up in a world where asking for help wasn't encouraged. You figured things out. You handled your problems. You dealt with it. If you were hurting, you pushed through. If you were struggling, you kept moving. If something broke, you fixed it. And if nobody came to help, you learned not to expect help next time. Over the years, that lesson becomes more than a habit. It becomes an identity. Psychologists call this self-reliant coping, the belief that problems should be solved alone. At first, it feels like strength, and in many ways, it is. It creates resilient people, independent people, capable people, but every strength has a shadow. The surprising part is that many men who pride themselves on independence aren't actually choosing it anymore. They're trapped inside it. What began as a survival skill slowly became their default setting, not because they wanted to carry everything alone, because after doing it for decades, they stopped knowing any other way, and eventually life starts handing you problems that were never meant to be carried by one person. Marriage, children, aging parents, financial pressure, health problems, responsibility after responsibility. And still, many Gen X fathers respond the same way they learned to respond as boys. Handle it yourself. Which brings us to David. David is 56. Every night before bed, he walks through the house checking things. The front door, the back door, the bills on the kitchen counter. His daughter's college payment, his mother's doctor appointment next week, the strange noise the car made yesterday. Everyone else is asleep. David is still carrying tomorrow. If you asked him how he's doing, he'd probably give the same answer he always gives. I'm fine, but that's the interesting thing about Gen X fathers. Many of them have become so good at functioning that nobody notices they're struggling, including themselves. And that's where things become dangerous, because emotional exhaustion rarely arrives all at once. It arrives slowly, quietly, one responsibility at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one postponed dream at a time. Until one day a man wakes up and realizes he doesn't remember the last time someone asked him what he needed, not what he needed to fix, not what he needed to do, what he needed. He spent so many years being needed by everyone else that he forgot what it feels like to be cared for himself. And for many Gen X fathers, that realization hits harder than they expect. Research on chronic stress shows that carrying long-term responsibility without adequate emotional support can gradually increase feelings of isolation, burnout, and emotional fatigue. Not because the person is weak, because human beings were never designed to carry everything alone. Yet many Gen X fathers spend decades doing exactly that. Here's where things become even more interesting. Most of these men don't see themselves as isolated. They see themselves as responsible. That's an important difference, because responsibility feels honorable, isolation doesn't. So the mind quietly disguises one as the other. A man tells himself he's being strong, being dependable, being selfless. And often he is, But beneath that strength can be a hidden belief: if I stop carrying everything, everything falls apart. For many fathers, that belief becomes the center of their identity, which leads to one of the biggest psychological traps in fatherhood. They begin measuring their worth by how much they can carry, how much they can provide, how much they can sacrifice, how many problems they can solve, and over time, they start believing that being needed is the same thing as being loved, but those are not the same thing. A father can be needed every day and still feel emotionally alone. Think about that. Many Gen X fathers spend years proving their love through sacrifice. The extra shifts, the financial stress, the endless responsibilities, and because they experience those sacrifices internally, they feel obvious. Of course, my family knows I love them. Look at everything I do. But children don't experience love through sacrifice the same way fathers experience providing it. Children experience love through connection, through conversations, through presence, through emotional availability, which creates a painful misunderstanding. The father feels his love every day. The family feels his absence in certain moments, and neither side fully understands the other. If you've ever spent years carrying responsibilities that nobody else seems to notice, subscribe. We're building a place for conversations that rarely happen, but matter deeply. Now here's the irony. Many Gen X fathers spent their entire lives becoming the person everyone could depend on, and in the process, they forgot how to depend on anyone else. Not because they wanted to, because they stopped practicing it. The same way a muscle weakens when it isn't used, the ability to ask for support weakens when it's ignored for decades. So instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," they say, "I'm tired." Instead of saying, "I'm struggling," they say, "I'm fine." Instead of saying, "I need help," they stay quiet. And that silence becomes part of who they are. David understands this better than anyone. One Saturday morning, he's sitting on his deck. The weather is perfect. The bills are paid. The kids are grown. For a moment, he finally has time to relax, but within minutes, his mind starts scanning for problems. Something needs fixing, something needs cleaning, something needs planning, because solving problems became the way David proved his value. Every problem solved meant he was useful. Every responsibility carried meant he mattered. The mind learns these patterns, and eventually it starts searching for new burdens to carry, because carrying them became part of who he is. Suddenly, he's not resting anymore. He's working. Again, psychologists sometimes refer to this as over-identification, when a role becomes so connected to your identity that you no longer know who you are without it. David isn't just a father. He became the provider, the fixer, the protector, the problem solver, and somewhere along the way, he stopped being David. That's why so many Gen X fathers feel exhausted, even when life finally becomes quieter. The responsibilities shrink, but the mindset remains. The burden isn't always outside anymore. Sometimes it's living inside them, which brings us to the most important realization in this video. The strongest fathers are not the ones who carry everything. They're the ones who know what should never have been carried alone. Because strength was never supposed to mean isolation. Strength was never supposed to mean silence. Strength was never supposed to mean becoming invisible inside your own life. And maybe that's the lesson many Gen X fathers are finally beginning to learn. Not how to carry more, how to put some of it down. Remember David? A few weeks later, his daughter asked him a simple question. "How are you doing?" At first, he gave the usual answer, "I'm fine." Then he stopped. For the first time in years, he admitted something he rarely allowed himself to say. "I'm tired." Not physically, tired of carrying everything alone. For a moment, neither of them said anything. His daughter simply listened, and something unexpected happened. David didn't feel weaker. He felt lighter, because sometimes the people who love us don't need us to carry everything. They just need us to let them see what we're carrying. That's the psychology of Gen X fathers who carry everything alone. The burden was never just responsibility. It was believing that responsibility had to be carried in silence. And maybe the question, Worth thinking about tonight is this: if you've spent your whole life being the person everyone depends on, have you become so busy carrying everyone else that you've forgotten how to let someone carry a small part of you? Because maybe strength isn't measured by how much you can hold. Maybe it's measured by whether you're willing to stop holding it alone